I think, Paula, first let me ask you, are you nervous?
Nervous?
Yeah.
With you asking me questions? A little.
Well, I hope it goes without saying at this point in the day how thrilled we have been on this day to hear all of these encomia for you. It has been, we have learned so much. We have relived parts of our history, perhaps in some instances long forgotten. And I hope we've been given an opportunity to think about where all of this fits in our lives, and I'll come to that at the end of my questions. But I just want to thank you for being here and for allowing us to look into your work in this way, because it's been, has it not been thrilling? Thank you.
Well, let me thank you. I mean, this is just a day I'll never forget, ever. Thank you, Dr. Simmons, and being in the, it's wonderful, wonderful being in the house of Ruth here. I've been in, seen Ruth work in other places too, and one of the things that is true about all of them is they're always buzzing with excitement and sense of possibility. There's always building going on, whether it was the Brown campus, she built half of Smith's campus.
Smithies.
Yeah, go there, hi Smithies. And she is just such an extraordinary leader.
That's enough of that.
I can finish.
Right.
I can finish. But an extraordinary leader. Okay, I'll finish that now.
So,
but can I thank the other people who
yes, please.
were so gracious and so wonderful. These panels were wonderful, everyone. Thank you so much for taking that kind of time and thinking it through like this. And I really appreciate it. I'll never forget you for doing it. So thank you so much. Now go ahead.
I have a lot of wonderful questions here, but I actually think I'm going to put them aside. Last night, I had an opportunity to go to Gloria's book signing. And it was extraordinary in a hall as big as this, which was packed with people. The thing that people most wanted to do is to find out what they needed to do in their lives. And one after another, where's Gloria? Is she in the back? Gloria, one after another came up asking you to point them in a direction. But don't you feel that for all that we say about scholarship and research, for all the vaunted thoughts we have as academics, in the end, people want to know what should we do in this moment with our lives. So I think I'm going to turn to that really and see if people want that to leave here with a sense of what this implies for them as they go forward, especially for our students. So I'll start with the notion that the individuals that you highlight in When and Where I Enter are just, it's an extraordinary group of heroic women. And it's always problematic to look at heroism because it's hard for us to relate to that. And how do you translate that to your own life? But of course you can, because every individual has in them the ability to produce something, to do something grand, to be enabled in a way that has an incredible effect on society. So I really, knowing all the time that you spent with these extraordinary women, what would you say to people today, to young people particularly, about how to take a lesson from what they did? And after all, the Memphis incident that spurred the activity of those women just happened in the way things happen in our lives every day. Just as bad as that incident, frankly. So what can you say that will help people understand the steps that they might take to shape their own lives in meaningful ways?
I think many of the women were, which also made it wonderful to write about them, were very self-reflective. I mean, they thought a lot about their lives. They didn't just happen to do things, they thought about their lives. And Ida B. Wells was a great example, and there was one great thing, which was really a gift in writing about her, is that she did leave parts of a diary. So you did get her voice in a way. And what you discover if you read that diary through, it's just about 2 years, it's not very much. But she's a person who grappled with all of the things that didn't make her heroic or courageous. She was she was orphaned at a very early age. A lot of things happened to her. And she had a lot of anger that she realized that she had. She said, anger is my besetting sin. And she knew if she didn't do something about it, that it would destroy her. You can see the self-consciousness in the diary. So what she and what lots of these people do in different ways is to transform that energy, to do positive things, to become a positive. Now, it doesn't mean this was completely successful. She still stayed pretty angry, right? But she was able to transform herself by thinking about it. And that's where the drive came from all her reform and all of her. She also didn't care, and this is true with many leaders and courageous women, particularly can be very sensitive about this, but she didn't care that if people liked her or not. There was work to do. And she followed, and once she sort of realized what lynching was made up of and what the issues were that created lynching, she just followed that logic of reform for it and didn't care about the price. Not all of us can do that. I mean, but she was quite extraordinary. So, she was called terrible. She talked about sexuality, but nobody talked about it. She talked about rape, but nobody used the word. And she paid a tremendous price in many ways for it. We were just talking, the New York Times, of course, and when women transcend their roles, like she did, the first thing she's hit with is like immorality, right? That's the sort of the. And so she, said, why would somebody be talking about rape? Why would somebody be, and she was charged with lots of infidelities. The New York Times called her a dirty-minded mulatress. That was my favorite one, yeah. But, she knew that she was right, though, in what she did. And she said, okay, I don't care. And at the end, even though she went through all of that, and she was very controversial, a lot of people didn't like her. But at the end, her life, you could tell she knew it was well lived. That was worth the price of all of it. She knew, in her funeral, at her funeral, she had requested that they sing, "My work is done." If you ever heard that, it gives you chills. That my work is done, and she knew it was, and that was all that mattered.
I think that certainly one element of it is the sense of self that people are able to form, not somebody else's, but their own. And you know, we live in a world in which really the kind of transfer of personalities and the cult of personality, it's a commodity, really. And people borrow things from others. They borrow a sense of style, yes, but they also borrow other things that are supposed to be more intrinsic, things that we own for ourselves. And sometimes it's easy to lose that. And I was thinking of all of you on the stage, whom I know well, and as you talked about Tony, and I thought, what you all share is that sort of ability to retain that part of you that is unique to you without worrying about borrowing something from somebody else. You're all so different, and yet you share so much. And I was going to say that I thought that one of the things that saves you in the end is that you all are able to laugh. And one of the greatest joys I have with all of you, all of my friends, is that laughter. We laugh uproariously because we have a sense of ourselves, and then we have this critical eye toward the things around us that don't undo us. We just think it's hilarious and ridiculous. And I think that that laughter keeps you going, and you have a great laugh. And it surfaces often, and sometimes very inappropriately. But I think that laughter is wonderful, and it's a laughter that Tony had as well. And when you said that that she had this, she knew what her epitaph should say, we were talking earlier that Tony knew that her memorial service had to be in the biggest cathedral available in New York City. And it will be, and it is taking place in St. John the Divine Cathedral in New York City. Because walking about the world with a sense of who you are has an enormous influence on other people. So one of the things I want to challenge everybody here to do is really to find that part of themselves that emulates all of these great individuals, because they came to know themselves well enough to know what they cared about most.
And they search to find their best selves. Where is your best self? You know, I mean, what activities create your best self? Mine happens to be writing. The person you're seeing up here is not as smart as what's in those books. Something else takes over. And writing, and Tony talks a lot about this too, writing, where you create your own world, where you are not beholden to anyone, where you're looking for the truth as you know it. That is where my best self is. It's not any place else. But everyone has a place of that, where you find that sweet spot. And it's really important, I think, to look for it and to understand where it is. Where is your best self?
Oh, I haven't found it yet.
Yeah, I don't know.
But I say borrowing from others, but I'll tell you, I did try to borrow something from Tony. Big mistake. Because, as you recall, her house burned down.
Yes.
She lost everything. And she rented a house on the river. And she rebuilt her house, and then because this house that she had rented was available, she said, why don't you rent that for the summer and you can get away from campus. So I decided to do that. Maya, you remember this? And I had this notion that, well, Toni Morrison was writing there. And the furniture remained, and I could write at her desk. And I could look out over the roses, the tea roses outside the window, and be inspired by them. And my level of creativity would surge. And I would be able to do something great because I was sitting in the same place where she created, I know it sounds ludicrous, but it didn't work, and I think I told her I was trying to do that, and she just thought it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. You can't borrow that. You have to. My best self, I like to think, is living up to my mother's dictum, which was never think you're better than another human being, ever. And so I have thought a lot about that across the years and hold that as a challenge for me. And I don't mean in the sense of not thinking that my ideas are better or not thinking that I can do something better. I mean in the sense of one's humanity.
Yes.
And so for me, every person has worth.
Yes.
And I try to remember that, and that's, I think it's the thing that I like most about myself,
Yes.
That I know that, I remember that, I believe in it so strongly, and my hope is that everything that I do reflects that. And that doesn't mean that I can't fire people. I can. It doesn't mean that I can't, be a harsh critic. I can. But I never, even with all of that, I never lose the ability to see that every person has the worth that I have.
Yes, absolutely.
So, Paula, I think about, in rereading parts of this book, I thought how similar the circumstances are to what we face today. And it frightened me to read that as we were coming out of the Civil War and the economy was improving. In fact, I wrote down your term for it. I think you call it a capacious racism or something like that. You probably don't remember that. There's so many words in the book. Right. But the thing is that we're at a moment in this country where the hatred and the racism that people of color and others experience on a daily basis is almost overwhelming to many people. And I can't imagine how a young person must feel in their own country looking at what is transpiring in the country today. We have a leader who is absolutely without morals, who has no penchant for elevating the aspirations of the country, who is filled with hatred, and I'm sorry, I'm probably going too far. No, I'm not going too far. And so in these times, what are we to do, Paula?
Oh, sure.
Gloria said it last night, forgive me for quoting, but she said we should get off our asses. But right now, in this moment, there's a lot of fear in this country about where we're headed. So going back to what you have seen from the lives of these heroic individuals, and what happened after the war, when attacks upon people became so virulent, what are some of the things that we ought to be thinking about today, given that we are reliving in some way those times?
One of the things that, following the life and the political philosophy of Ida Wells taught me was, you're right. I mean, there's so much that is, she lived in a time that's very similar to ours in many ways in terms of new technologies, differences in wealth, et cetera. And it was also a time in Reconstruction in the early 20th century when Black achievement was tremendous. Just like now we can point to Black achievement was immense. I mean, it was just one generation out of slavery. I mean, this is the churches had expanded, businesses are being done, accumulation of wealth, people going this, you know, they said they called Black people like a whole race trying to go to school, right? There was an election in Memphis of 1880, 92% of eligible Black voters voted in 1880. Put in Black legislators in Tennessee, I'm talking about Memphis, Tennessee. Oh, lots of firsts, Monroe Trotter, first Black Phi Beta Kappa from Harvard, all this is going on. And so there is a lot of people who said, well, the race question is resolving itself. And the last thing we need is any protest to sort of rock the boat. That in fact, if you're respectable, if you do the things that are required in America, accumulate wealth, get rid of ignorance, education, then first-class citizenship it's inevitable. So let's do it. But Wells comes along and says, but wait a minute, yes, those achievements are great, but violence is also increasing against Blacks. It's the beginning of mass incarceration in this period. It's the beginning of real segregation in this period. The South wasn't segregated before this. There's real segregation is beginning to happen. Violence of every kind. Things are being taken away. In fact, she says, the people being lynched are the people who have a lot of these middle-class people because they want their land, they want, et cetera. So the way to think about it, I think, is that there are two planes going at the same. You can't say nothing's changed and there's no achievements. No progress. You can't say that. But it doesn't mean that that protest is still not necessary. Is no longer necessary, and that's what she said. She said now, and plus this elitism. She says we have to mobilize all working classes. This is the only way, this is the only way we're going to be able to achieve it. It's power, period. And so I think if we think about the country in that way, and the one thing there is, I think, it's as horrible as the president is, but to me there's a silver lining that, because that stuff has always been in America. So now it's out. Now we know what we're really against. We might have been lulled a little bit in the last, administration. So now we know what we have to mobilize against. So in that way, but we shouldn't despair. We should get off our asses.
So my final question, you've worked in universities and you've worked in a variety of universities, so you know the life that we have in universities. And I wonder if you have thoughts about what the implications therefore are for us in universities and what we should be doing.
I'd like you to.
Sorry?
I'd like you to talk about that. No, seriously.
No. I mean, well, Gloria and I were talking about, we've always had the idea that the academy holds itself apart from society in many ways, in many unhelpful ways. We're also highly imitative. Whatever the next university does, we want to imitate that instead of creating new modalities that are unique to what we think we should be doing. So in general, we tend to be pretty cowardly in universities about doing the right thing when we think it's the right thing. So, for example, one of the great opportunities for our students is to have activists in our midst and to make appointments to the faculty of people who have done these things. And Gloria and I have a kind of a history here in regard to trying to put that into work in a university, and you find that trying to do these things is often very, very difficult to do.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I would say we have an obligation to do is to help our students think deeply about the role that they might play to address some of the ills in society, and to really not push them aside, but to help them. When I first got to Prairie View, I got a message from a young man who was about to go to jail for 2 years. And he appealed to me because he said that he was going to jail because he had painted a mural on a wall here at Prairie View. And it depicted, it was a political statement that he was trying to make. And somehow he was fined $9,000, and he was unable to pay the $9,000. And somehow in the end, as he was issued warrants for his arrest and so forth, and he was brought back to Texas, and in the end, it was the eve of his sentencing, and he was about to go off to jail because of a mural that he did at the university. Universities can be crazy places. We are here to educate students and to nurture them and to teach them what life can be. And yet there are instances like that that come up all the time where it doesn't really compute. So we're full of rules and regulations. So I think one of the things that we can do, which I advocate often, is that we can actually think about what we're doing, and we can make decisions based on reason and not on some stilted version of what universities should do or what law enforcement should do. And I think that if we thought more creatively, we would be able to help our students more to be creative themselves. If you think about the young people who have created things that have been groundbreaking things, that's what we ought to be here to do, is to help our students do that. So I'd like to see universities be bolder in adopting programs that are innovative and that will help our students understand how they can translate what they're doing here into the world. Now, we're building innovation centers that teach them how to commercialize the inventions that they do. Okay, that's fine. So it's okay, apparently, to teach them about how to commercialize things and make money, but it's not okay to teach them about how to be activists who can really transform society. I don't quite understand that. So one of the things that I hope that universities will do more and more of is really try to wrap their arms around students and help them with their ideas of all sorts, not just their inventions, but of all sorts. And I wonder about those women in their day when they were trying to solve these problems, if there had been a place for them to help them with the things that they were dealing with. Because honestly, in the late 19th century, for these women to be getting on a boat and going to Europe to talk about the ills of this country, which got them into trouble,
Right.
of course. But I mean, that's extraordinary that they were doing that in those times. So activists are important, even more so today, perhaps, than in the immediate past because of what we're facing. But I'd like to see us provide a place for students to become very seasoned activists so that they can make a much bigger impact on society. Were you very active as a college student?
No. I was much more of an observer. I've always been a journalist. I mean, I've always wanted to write about it, because one thing about activists is I don't have time to write. So I like to record what was, you know,
What the
happening.
activists are doing.
So what the activists were doing. So I was at Howard University when there was a takeover of the administration building. And the idea was to make Howard a black university rather than a Negro university. And we tried to, I mean, I was on all the committees. We tried to change the curriculum. I mean, you couldn't study jazz.
No. Couldn't study jazz.
Jazz at Howard. You wouldn't give you. So, so they actually took over the administration building at that point, and then the school ran better with students running the switchboard and everything than ever did. Really, people brought in food. I mean, it was great. But I wanted to write. For my role, I felt was to. I mean, I was there in the building, but my role was really to write about. So I'm activist in the sense that I write about activists, I think.
But Howard had some extraordinary intellectuals.
Absolutely.
The great, in fact, one of the reasons that I stayed in academic life was because of a Howard professor who was seconded to Harvard for, I think, a year. Redding. I don't know if you had him as a professor.
Saunders Redding?
Uh-huh.
Well, I knew Saunders. I didn't have him as a professor.
Okay.
But he was a friend, and I actually edited some of his work when I was at Howard University Press.
Yes.
A
So-
brilliant, a gentleman scholar.
Gentleman scholar, brilliant faculty, and a lot of the people who came out of Howard in that era, really
Yes.
fantastic
Yes.
writers and
Yes.
scholars.
Yes.
At Prairie View, we are doing African American studies, no matter what, because out of these kinds of conversations and the leadership of people like Melanie, we are going to have some outstanding scholars continue the tradition that you and so many others have started for our community. So I thank you
Well,
immensely
thank you.
for what you've done, and thank you for
Thank
coming
you
to
for
Prairie
what
View.
you've done. Thank you. Thank you.
Melanie, are you coming to close us out? Are you coming to close us out? You're pointing at me, I'm closing us out? I was so excited when I got up this morning, and I'm so embarrassed, almost embarrassed, because somebody pointed out that I'm wearing 2 different color shoes. Now, there are 2 ways to think about that. It wasn't until much later in the day that somebody came up to me and it pointed out that I was wearing 2 different color shoes, because I didn't even notice, because today has been a good day. Anytime we have an opportunity to come as a community and reflect on these important issues that affect our lives so deeply, in my view, is a good day. So I hope you leave with the understanding that we want to connect with you. We want you to be able to come to these forums whenever they are available, and work with us to explore the many ways in which we can have an impact on society. Because universities are, after all, universities serve society, and we should never forget that. And we always want to stay connected to how we can do that. So thank you for coming today, and we look forward to seeing you in the future.
Ms. Ruth, your shoes.